The US president has signalled a major shift on the war in Ukraine. He said Kyiv could, with the support of the European Union, recover all the territory it has lost to Russia. In a social media post, Donald Trump said Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form and, who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. Now, he made these remarks after meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Trump had earlier suggested Kyiv would need to give up land to Moscow in a potential peace deal. Ukraine's president welcomed Trump's new perspective.
It's a big shift by President Trump.
Shift. This post of Trump, it's a big shift.
What do you expect from NATO in the next 2 years? What about economic?
Anthony King is Professor of War Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK and is joining us now. Thanks so much for your time. Welcome to DW. Can I ask, how big a shift do you see Trump's latest remarks on Ukraine as being? How significant is this, what he said?
Oh, I mean, absolutely extraordinary. Within kind of 6-7 months, he's gone from a position of berating President Zelensky in the White House and telling him he had no cards to play, and essentially pandering to President Putin, to not just retracing his steps to a position of support for President Zelensky, but that the total reintegration of Ukraine is the goal, and indeed beyond that. So it is a remarkable transformation. I mean, we are used to President Trump's turbulence and his kind of inconstancy in terms of policy and strategy. But this probably, in terms of foreign policy, is one of the most remarkable that he's enacted so far in this presidency.
As you're saying, we're used to Trump going from one side to the other. But if we can look at the timing possibly of this, why do you think this U-turn now? I mean, do you think there's any reason for the timing?
Yes, I do. And I think they're in the operational realities of the war, which is after the Anchorage summit last month, it's quite clear that President Putin has absolutely no interest in negotiating a ceasefire, still less a peace. And that after that summit, he's actually accelerated and amplified his strategic bombardments of Ukrainian cities. He's flown over with drones over Poland. Whether that was an accident or on purpose is difficult to say, but clearly points to a carelessness in terms of his attitude towards NATO and the West. And on the ground, Russian forces are continuing to make bloody but significant advances in the east. So I think that Trump finally has realised there's no negotiating with President Putin. It's the military facts on the ground are going to determine the outcome of this war. And I infer, who knows what President Trump is actually thinking, but I infer it's those changed facts or accentuated facts which has precipitated this change of policy.
So in this social media post, Trump wrote Ukraine could take back its land and, who knows, maybe even go further than that. So if we look at the practicalities, how can Ukraine go about winning back territory?
Well, and this is the point where I think the statement is strange, because although it's really welcome, I mean, the White House, Trump, the US, utterly critical to the Ukrainian war effort and to the quality of the ceasefire/peace that they will get. The US is utterly indispensable here and will determine that outcome. Now, so Trump's support for Ukraine is devoutly to be wished. But the reality is that while Russian forces, the Russian attacks have precipitated Trump's change of policy, there's no realistic chance of Ukraine throwing Russia militarily out of Ukraine. Now, that's a deeply regrettable military fact, but in order to throw the Russians out of Ukraine completely, the Ukrainian armed forces would have to be about 3 times the size. It would need to be completely re-equipped with most modern technology. It would need to be retrained. So the actual, although it's deeply regrettable that a illegal invasion is likely to be partially successful, that is the reality on the ground in 2025, and it is remarkable that now Putin goes back to Trump goes back to the notion that he will eliminate and throw Putin out of Ukraine, and that worrying clause, and go further than that, which actually is, I don't think, particularly helpful in terms of international relations, international discussions about how to end the war.
We are going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much, Anthony King, Professor of War Studies at Exeter University. Great to talk to you.
A pleasure.
All right, let's cross straight to our studio in Riga. DW correspondent Yuri Resheto, who was formerly based in Moscow, is covering the Russian angle for us. Good to see you, Yuri. Tell us, first of all, how the Kremlin is reacting to Trump's sudden change of tone.
Well, Anya, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov complained that Trump's statements regarding Russia would be made under the influence, he said, of Ukrainian President Zelensky, and that these words were definitely wrong. Also, Peskov rejected Trump's words that Russia would be economically a paper tiger. Russia wouldn't be a paper tiger, he said, but a bear, and there are no paper bears. In other words, Russia would be strong. Overall, however, I have the impression that Moscow, as so often, is waiting to see what happens and playing everything down. Firstly, because Trump himself has relativized his statements. When asked whether the US would support its NATO allies if they shoot down a Russian aircraft, Trump said it would depend on the circumstances. And second, when journalists asked whether Trump trusted Putin, he promised to answer that question in about a month.
OK, so Russia's playing these comments down. But do you think Trump's comments could potentially affect Russian strategy at all, on the battlefield or diplomatically?
Well, I suppose that Trump's statements can't really change or affect anything. He simply makes a lot of statements that he himself often put into perspective and relativize. Anyway, Kremlin spokesman Peskov hinted today that Russia wouldn't have any intention to end the war. He was asked whether there would be a new second wave of mobilization in Russia. He responded that no, there were enough contract soldiers, professional soldiers in reserve on all fronts. As for diplomacy, Anya, I would like to remind you that the Kremlin's official line is to seek closer ties with the US. And today, Peskov once again mentioned the particularly warm relations between Trump and Putin. We don't know if that is true, but it is obviously important for the Kremlin to put on a brave face.
We'll have to leave it there. But Yuri Resheto, reporting from Riga, thank you so much. Now, Trump's remarks are also being closely watched here in Europe, where leaders are weighing what his words might mean for their own support of Ukraine. Let's talk to our Brussels correspondent, Anchal Vora, about that. Anchal, tell us how EU leaders in Brussels are reacting to Trump's about-face regarding Ukraine.
Well, it's a mix of emotions, really. Relief, surprise, also a fair amount of skepticism. Now, let me read a few of the comments to you here. French President Macron has said that President Trump's Truth Social post essentially reflected Ukraine's ability not just to hold on, but to impose respect for its rights. He's referring to Ukraine's expectations to hold on to its territory that has been annexed by Russia. Kaja Kallas, EU's top diplomat, has said that Trump has made a very strong statement, quote, that we hadn't heard before. So it really shows that we are in the same understanding. The EU Commission here is trying to send us a message that this is a welcome shift and that this shift has come about after a lot of efforts from the European Commission and European leaders and has essentially been a result of that. Now, the bigger question here is how actually has Europe's post, how does it actually reveal alignment with European policy? Europeans for a long time have been preparing for a longer-term solution and peace through strength. There is a sense here that Putin, Russian president, cannot be trusted, so Ukraine has to be turned into what the EU Commission president said, a steel porcupine. Officials off the record tell us Ukraine needs to be turned into Israel, as strong as Israel in the military sense, so it can hold on to its territory, it can push back on more Russian invasions, and only when Ukraine is that strong, which will happen with European support, can President Putin be trusted to sit down across the table and talk about peace in a way that Russia doesn't decide to invade again. Now there is a sense here that President Trump is beginning to understand that it is possible for Ukraine to push back on Russian efforts in time if Ukraine continues to get support.
DW's Anshel Vora reporting from Brussels. Anshel, thank you.